On Christmas Eve, a pilot made the worst decision of his life. When Brock Callahan saw a black man in a faded hoodie sitting in seat 1A with a sleeping child in his arms, he assumed one thing: this man did not belong. In front of VIP passengers, he coldly demanded the father move to the back. He even threatened to call the police. What Brock didn't know was that the quiet man holding his son was the billionaire who owned the plane. And when they landed, only one of them would walk away with their career intact. The snow had been falling over Teterboro for 3 hours straight, turning the private airport into a white blur of delayed flights and frustrated travelers. But inside the Gulfstream G650 parked at Gate 7, Marcus Hale sat perfectly still in seat 1A. His 6-year-old son, Elijah, curled against his chest, breathing the slow rhythm of deep sleep. Marcus pulled the hood of his worn gray sweatshirt a little higher and watched the snow pile against the oval window. This was their first Christmas since Sarah passed. 8 months of learning how to braid hair, pack lunches, and answer questions about why Mommy wasn't coming home. 8 months of watching his son search for her face in crowds. Aspen was supposed to be a fresh start. New memories. Just the two of them. He had booked this flight through his assistant under the name M. Hale, nothing more. No titles, no fanfare. The Gulfstream belonged to Apex Charter, a luxury aviation company he had acquired just over a year ago through one of his subsidiary firms. It was one of more than 40 aircraft in his fleet, scattered across companies most people had never heard of. Marcus preferred it that way. In 2 decades of building Hale Global into a logistics empire worth billions, he had never given a single interview, never attended an award ceremony, never allowed his photograph to appear in any publication. The few images that existed were grainy, taken from odd angles at charity events he couldn't avoid. His anonymity was deliberate. He had grown up poor in Detroit, the son of a janitor and a nurse who worked double shifts. He remembered what it felt like to be judged by the clothes on his back, the neighborhood on his ID. He remembered the store clerks who followed him through aisles, the restaurant hostesses who suddenly had no available tables. When success came, he swore his son would never grow up believing that wealth made him better than anyone else. So Marcus dressed simply, lived quietly, and let the world make its assumptions. The cabin door opened, letting in a gust of frozen air and the sound of voices. Marcus didn't turn around. He felt Elijah stir slightly, then settle back into sleep. The first to board was a man in his early 50s, silver hair swept back, cashmere coat draped over his shoulders like a cape. Preston Whitmore III carried himself with the easy confidence of someone who had never been told no. Behind him came a younger couple, the man in a tailored suit, the woman wrapped in fur, both already complaining about the delay. Preston stopped 3 steps into the cabin. His eyes landed on seat 1A, then on the man occupying it. "Diane," he called, his voice carrying the sharp edge of irritation. "There seems to be a problem." The head flight attendant appeared instantly, a tall woman in her 40s with a practiced smile that never quite reached her eyes. She had been with Apex for 12 years and knew exactly which passengers paid enough to matter. "Mr. Whitmore, how can I help?" Preston nodded toward Marcus. "Who is that? Why is he in my seat?" Diane's smile faltered as she studied the figure in 1A. A black man in a faded hoodie, jeans, and sneakers, holding a sleeping child. She pulled up the manifest on her tablet and scrolled through the names. "The booking shows M. Hale for seat 1A, she said carefully. "There's no VIP notation. Perhaps an employee pass or a courtesy booking." Preston's jaw tightened. "I specifically requested 1A when I chartered this flight. This is unacceptable." "I understand completely, Mr. Whitmore. Let me get the captain." She disappeared toward the cockpit, and Preston stood in the aisle, making no effort to hide his displeasure. The couple behind him exchanged glances. "Probably someone's nephew," the man muttered. His name was Richard Ashford, a hedge fund manager who had made his fortune betting against pension funds. "You know how these things work. Affirmative action in the skies. His wife Meredith laughed, a thin sound like breaking glass. Marcus heard every word. His hand found Elijah's back, fingers pressing gently against the small bones of his spine. The boy slept on, unaware. Captain Brock Callahan emerged from the cockpit with the measured stride of a man who had spent 18 years commanding aircraft and expected the same authority on the ground. He was tall, square-jawed, the kind of pilot who looked like he belonged in a recruiting poster. What the passengers didn't know was that Brock was desperate. The airline industry had been brutal lately, and he had been quietly searching for an exit. Preston Whitmore had hinted at a position as the family's personal pilot, a job that paid 3 times his current salary with half the hours. All Brock had to do was make the right impression. He approached seat 1A and looked down at Marcus. "Sir, I'm going to need to see your boarding confirmation." Marcus shifted slightly, careful not to wake Elijah. He pulled out his phone with his free hand and showed the screen. The confirmation was clear. M. Hale, seat 1A, Teterboro to Aspen. Brock barely glanced at it. His eyes moved instead over Marcus's clothes, his shoes, the sleeping child in his arms. He had already made his decision. "There seems to be a system error," Brock said, his voice dropping to something quieter, more threatening. "This seat was reserved for a priority passenger. I'm going to need you to relocate to the rear of the cabin." Marcus met his gaze. "My son has been asleep for 40 minutes. We've been sitting here since boarding began. The confirmation is valid." Brock leaned closer. "Let me be very clear. You can cooperate, or I can have airport security escort you off this aircraft. It's Christmas Eve. Do you really want your son to watch his father get removed in handcuffs?" The words hung in the air like smoke. Marcus felt something twist in his chest, a familiar sensation he had spent years learning to control. He thought of every time someone had looked at him and seen only what they expected to see. Every door that had closed, every assumption made before he could speak a single word. He could end this confrontation with one phone call, one sentence. He could watch Brock's face crumble as the truth landed. But then he looked at Elijah, still sleeping, thumb tucked loosely in his mouth. The boy had already lost his mother. He didn't need to see his father fighting strangers on Christmas Eve. He didn't need to learn yet that the world could be cruel. And there was something else, something darker that Marcus rarely admitted even to himself. He wanted to know. He wanted to see exactly how far they would go when they believed no one was watching, when they thought there would be no consequences. So he made his choice. Marcus rose slowly, cradling Elijah against his shoulder. The boy murmured something unintelligible, but didn't wake. Without a word, Marcus stepped into the aisle. Preston smirked and lowered himself into seat 1A, brushing invisible dust from the leather. "Thank you, Captain. This is why I appreciate professionals." Brock nodded, satisfaction settling across his features. He gestured for Diane to lead Marcus away. She walked him past the main cabin, past the comfortable seats and polished tables, past Richard and Meredith, who watched with barely concealed amusement. At the very back of the aircraft, near the galley, she pointed to a jump seat, a fold-down chair meant for crew during takeoff and landing. "You can sit here," she said flatly. Marcus looked at the seat. It was narrow, uncomfortable, designed for short use. There was no window, no table, no dignity. He sat down anyway, adjusting Elijah in his lap so the boy's head rested against his shoulder. Diane turned and walked away without another word. From the front of the cabin, Marcus heard Preston's voice, bright with self-satisfaction. "You know, Brock, this is exactly the kind of attention to detail I value. When my family starts looking for our own flight crew, I'll be sure to remember this." Brock's reply was warm, eager. "I appreciate that, Mr. Whitmore. It's always a pleasure serving guests who understand standards." Marcus closed his eyes. His jaw was tight, His hands, wrapped around his sleeping son, trembled slightly with the effort of staying still. He had built a company worth billions. He had employees across 6 continents. He owned the very aircraft he was now sitting in like a stowaway. And none of it mattered, because to them he was just a black man in a hoodie who didn't belong. The engines began to hum. Outside, the snow kept falling, and Marcus Hale, one of the wealthiest men in America, held his son in the back of his own plane and waited to see what kind of people he had hired. He already suspected the answer, but he needed to be sure. The Gulf Stream climbed through the storm clouds, and the cabin transformed into a theater of luxury. Diane moved through the main cabin with practiced grace, offering champagne flutes to Preston and the Ashfords. Crystal glasses caught the soft overhead lighting. Laughter floated through the air like something imported. In the back, near the galley, Marcus adjusted Elijah on his lap and watched. 20 minutes into the flight, Elijah stirred. His eyes fluttered open, confused by the unfamiliar surroundings. He looked up at his father with the disoriented expression of a child waking in a strange place. "Daddy, I'm thirsty." Marcus stroked his son's hair. "I know, buddy. Let me get you some water." He caught Diane's eye as she passed with an empty tray. "Excuse me, could I get a bottle of water for my son?" Diane looked at him the way one might look at a stain on expensive upholstery. "The service area is reserved for cabin passengers. There's a tap in the rear lavatory if you need water." She walked away before Marcus could respond. Elijah tugged at his father's sleeve. "Daddy, I'm really thirsty." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. He had given hundreds of millions to charity. He had created thousands of jobs. He had sat across from senators and foreign ministers, and now he was being told to give his 6-year-old tap water from an airplane bathroom. He was about to stand when a shadow fell across them. A young flight attendant, no older than her late 20s, crouched beside the jump seat. She had dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail and eyes that held something the others lacked. Conscience, maybe, or simply kindness. "Here," she whispered, pressing a cold water bottle and a small packet of cookies into Marcus's hand. "I'm so sorry about all of this." Marcus looked at her name tag. Elena. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You didn't have to do that." Elena glanced toward the front of the cabin, checking that Diane wasn't watching. "It's not right what they're doing. She stopped herself, shaking her head. "I'm sorry." She was gone before he could say anything else, slipping back into her duties with the silent efficiency of someone who had learned to survive by not being noticed. Elijah drank half the bottle in one long gulp, then clutched the cookies like treasure. Marcus watched Elena work, wondering how long she had been swallowing her conscience to keep her job. An hour passed. The snow had given way to darkness outside the windows, and the cabin had settled into the comfortable hum of money at rest. Preston was reviewing something on his laptop, occasionally murmuring to Richard across the aisle about market projections and property values. Meredith had fallen asleep beneath a cashmere blanket, her face slack with the peace of those who had never known real worry. Elijah tugged at Marcus's arm again. "Daddy, I need to go potty." Marcus stood, lifting his son to his hip. The main cabin lavatory was just a few steps away, its door marked with a small illuminated sign. He had taken exactly 2 steps when Diane appeared, blocking his path. "Where are you going?" Marcus kept his voice even. "My son needs to use the restroom." Diane's smile was a thin, practiced thing. "That lavatory is reserved for our VIP passengers. There's a smaller facility near the galley. I'm sure you understand." "He's 6 years old. This is the closest restroom." "Policy is policy." Diane's voice hardened almost imperceptibly. "I'd hate to have to involve the captain again." Marcus stared at her. In that moment, he could feel 20 years of insults pressing against his chest, all the small cruelties he had absorbed and filed away and tried to forget. the security guards who followed him through department stores, the taxi drivers who wouldn't stop, the hotel clerks who asked for extra identification. He had built an empire, and still, it followed him. His hand trembled slightly as he turned and carried Elijah toward the back of the plane, past the galley, to a lavatory barely large enough for one person. "Daddy, why can't we use the other bathroom?" Marcus helped his son inside, his voice carefully controlled. "Sometimes people make silly rules, buddy. It's okay. This one works just fine." When they returned to the jump seat, Elijah looked up at his father with worried eyes. "Are we in trouble?" Marcus pulled his son close. "No, buddy. We're not in trouble. We're just playing a game. Remember? We're secret explorers. We have to pretend we're invisible." Elijah's face lit up with the easy acceptance of childhood. "Like spies?" "Exactly like spies. And spies never let anyone know who they really are." From the front of the cabin, Preston's voice drifted back, pitched just loud enough to carry. "I don't understand how people like that even get on a charter flight. Probably some employee discount or promotional giveaway. Standards in this industry are slipping every year." Richard laughed from across the aisle. "You know how it is these days. Everyone gets a seat at the table whether they've earned it or not." Marcus's hand found Elijah's back, fingers pressing gently as his son settled against him. The boy couldn't understand what was being said, and Marcus intended to keep it that way for as long as possible. But inside, something was burning. Another 30 minutes passed. The cabin lights had dimmed to a soft amber glow, and most of the passengers had settled into the drowsy comfort of a smooth flight. Marcus sat motionless in the jump seat, Elijah dozing against his chest, when Elena appeared again. She moved differently this time, her steps hesitant, her eyes darting toward the front of the cabin every few seconds. When she reached Marcus, she crouched low, her voice barely above a breath. "I need to apologize to you again." Marcus shook his head. "You already did. And you gave us water. That was more than anyone else." "I should do more." Elena's voice cracked slightly. "I should say something, but I have a mother at home. She's sick. She depends on me. If I lose this job..." "I understand." Marcus cut her off gently. "You're not the one who needs to apologize. You showed us kindness when no one was watching. That matters." Elena looked at him for a long moment, and something flickered in her expression. She had seen scared passengers before, angry passengers, defeated passengers. But Marcus was none of those things. There was something in his stillness that didn't match his circumstances, a quiet authority that his worn hoodie couldn't hide. "Who are you?" she asked, then immediately looked horrified at her own question. "I'm sorry, that was rude. I didn't mean..." "It's all right," Marcus offered a small smile. "I'm just a father trying to get his son to the mountains for Christmas." Elena nodded, though her eyes lingered on his face a moment longer than necessary. Then she rose and disappeared back into her duties. The turbulence hit without warning. One moment the cabin was calm. The next, the aircraft dropped like a stone, throwing unsecured items across the space. A glass shattered somewhere in the galley. The overhead bins rattled. The fasten seatbelt sign blazed to life with an urgent chime. Brock's voice came over the intercom, tight but controlled. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some unexpected turbulence. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We should be through this shortly." But they weren't through it shortly. The plane bucked and shuddered, riding invisible waves of violent air. In the main cabin, the careful veneer of wealth and composure began to crack. Preston gripped his armrest so hard his knuckles went white. His laptop slid across the table, and he grabbed for it instinctively, pulling it toward him like a shield. Meredith was awake now, crying openly. Her earlier elegance dissolved into raw fear. "Do something!" she screamed at no one in particular. "Why is this happening? I don't want to die!" Richard was no better, his face pale, his composure shattered. "This is unacceptable! We paid premium rates for this flight!" Diane had abandoned any pretense of service. She clung to a seat back near the galley, her professional mask completely gone, replaced by naked terror. In the middle of the chaos, Marcus sat perfectly still. Elijah was crying now, his small body trembling against his father's chest. Marcus wrapped both arms around him, one hand cradling the back of his head, the other pressed firmly against his spine. "Shh, buddy, it's okay. Listen to Daddy. You remember Mr. Buttons? The teddy bear from the story?" Elijah hiccuped. "The one who went on adventures." "That's the one." Marcus's voice was steady, unhurried, as if they were sitting in a living room instead of a shaking aircraft. "Well, Mr. Buttons once flew through a storm just like this, and do you know what he did?" "What?" He closed his eyes and thought about all the people who loved him. And the storm couldn't touch him, because he was wrapped up in all that love. "Can you do that for me? Close your eyes and think about Mommy and Grandma and Daddy. Think about how much we love you." Elijah squeezed his eyes shut, his small fists clutching Marcus's hoodie. Elena had been making her way through the cabin, checking on passengers despite her own fear. When she reached the jump seat and saw Marcus calm, steady, telling stories to his son while the plane shook around them, she stopped. She had worked dozens of flights, seen hundreds of passengers. She had never seen anyone like this. The people who had mocked him, who had treated him like dirt beneath their shoes, were falling apart, and Marcus sat like a rock in a river, unmoved by the current. The turbulence lasted another 10 minutes, though it felt like hours. When it finally subsided, the cabin was a mess of scattered items and shattered nerves. Preston was slumped in his seat, his face gray, his hands still shaking as he pulled his laptop back onto the table. He needed to distract himself. He needed to focus on something concrete. Tomorrow's meeting, the presentation. He opened his files, clicking through slides with trembling fingers. The Hale Global deal. $200 million in commercial real estate. The most important meeting of his career. He had never met the company's CEO personally, had only dealt with lawyers and representatives, but tomorrow, in Aspen, he would finally present directly to the decision-makers. He clicked to the company background slide, leadership team, board of directors, and there, at the top, CEO and founder, Marcus Hale. Below the title was a photograph. It was slightly grainy, taken at an angle, clearly captured at some event where the subject hadn't wanted to be photographed. But the face was clear enough. The jawline, the eyes, the quiet intensity. Preston's blood turned to ice. Slowly, as if moving through water, he turned his head toward the back of the plane, toward the jump seat, toward the man in the worn gray hoodie who was still holding his sleeping son. Marcus was looking directly at him. There was no anger in those eyes, no triumph, just the patient, knowing gaze of someone who had seen everything he needed to see. Preston's throat closed. His hands began to shake again, but this time it had nothing to do with turbulence. He slammed the laptop shut as if the image might escape and accuse him. Richard noticed the sudden movement. "Preston, you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." Preston couldn't speak. He stood abruptly, nearly stumbling over his own feet. I need to use the restroom, He moved down the aisle on unsteady legs, his eyes fixed on the floor, desperate to avoid looking at the jump seat. But as he passed, a voice stopped him cold. "Nice presentation." Marcus's tone was quiet, almost conversational. "I look forward to hearing it tomorrow morning." Preston's knees nearly buckled. He grabbed the nearest seat back to steady himself, then lurched toward the lavatory and locked himself inside. In the main cabin, Richard and Meredith exchanged confused glances. Diane had noticed nothing, too busy trying to restore some semblance of order to the galley. Elena stood near the back, her eyes moving between Preston's retreating figure and the calm man in the jump seat, and felt the first stirrings of understanding. 20 minutes later, the wheels touched down in Aspen. The landing was smooth, almost gentle, a stark contrast to the chaos that had preceded it. As the aircraft taxied toward the private terminal, Captain Brock emerged from the cockpit with the satisfied swagger of a man who believed he had conquered something. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Aspen. As you can see, there was nothing to worry about. 18 years of experience at your service." Preston had emerged from the lavatory looking like a man walking to his own execution. He gathered his belongings mechanically, refusing to look anywhere near the back of the plane. The aircraft door opened, and cold mountain air rushed in. But instead of the usual quiet of a private terminal, there was activity. Multiple black SUVs were parked on the tarmac, their engines running. Men in dark suits stood in formation near the stairs. And walking toward the plane with purpose was a man in his 60s, silver-haired, wearing the unmistakable expression of someone about to deliver very bad news. Gregory Walsh, Chief Operating Officer of Apex Charter, stepped into the cabin. His eyes swept the space until they found Marcus, still seated in the jump seat with Elijah in his arms. Something flickered across Gregory's face, a mixture of horror and profound apology. "Mr. Hale." He moved past the frozen passengers without acknowledging them. "Sir, I cannot begin to express how deeply sorry I am. Your assistant contacted us mid-flight. I came personally the moment I understood what had happened." Brock stepped forward, confusion creasing his face. "Gregory? What's going on? Who's Mr. Hale?" Gregory turned slowly to face the pilot. When he spoke, his voice was ice. "Mr. Hale is the man you forced out of his seat tonight. The man you threatened with police and handcuffs. The man you relegated to a jump seat like he was cargo." He let each word land. "Marcus Hale is the owner of Apex Charter. He owns this aircraft. He signs your paychecks." The color drained from Brock's face. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Preston had gone completely still, one hand frozen on his briefcase, his eyes finally lifting to meet the gaze of the man he had spent the entire flight demeaning. Marcus rose slowly, carefully, cradling Elijah against his shoulder. The boy had fallen asleep again, exhausted by fear and the lateness of the hour. For a moment, Marcus simply stood there, taking in the faces around him. Brock, gray and trembling. Preston, looking like a man watching his future collapse. Diane, pressed against the galley wall, her practiced composure finally, completely destroyed. Richard and Meredith frozen in their seats, their smug expressions replaced by dawning horror. And Elena, standing apart from the others, her expression unreadable. Marcus looked at each of them in turn. When he finally spoke, his voice carried no anger, no satisfaction, only a quiet, terrible truth. "You didn't know who I was. That's exactly the problem." He walked past them, toward the door, toward the cold night air and the SUVs waiting to take him and his son to the mountains. Behind him, the cabin remained frozen in silence. The cold air hit Marcus as he stepped onto the aircraft stairs, but he didn't hurry. Elijah stirred against his shoulder, then settled back into sleep, his small fingers curled into the fabric of the gray hoodie. Behind him, Gregory Walsh was already dealing with the wreckage. "Captain Callahan." Gregory's voice cut through the night like a blade. "You are hereby suspended from all Apex Charter operations, effective immediately. Your conduct tonight constitutes abuse of authority, harassment of a passenger, and discriminatory treatment based on appearance. These are federal matters. You will surrender your credentials to security, and you should expect to hear from both our legal department and law enforcement within the next 48 hours. Brock's face had gone from gray to ash. He stumbled forward, his hands raised in a gesture that was half surrender, half supplication. "Gregory, please. I've been with this industry for 18 years. I have a wife, 2 kids in college. I didn't know. How could I have known?" Gregory's expression didn't soften. "That's precisely the point. You didn't know, so you assumed. You assumed the worst about a man because of how he looked, and then you threatened him with arrest in front of his child, on Christmas Eve. I was trying to accommodate a VIP client. I was doing my job. Your job is to fly the aircraft safely and treat every passenger with dignity. Instead, you treated Mr. Hale like a criminal because he wasn't wearing a suit. Gregory gestured to the security personnel waiting at the base of the stairs. Go with them. Your union representative will be contacted in the morning. Brock looked toward Marcus, who had stopped at the bottom of the stairs and was watching silently. For a moment, it seemed like the pilot might say something, might try to appeal directly to the man he had wronged. But whatever he saw in Marcus's eyes made him think better of it. He lowered his head and walked toward the waiting security officers. Preston had been hovering near the aircraft door, clutching his briefcase like a lifeline. When Marcus turned and began walking toward the waiting SUVs, Preston rushed down the stairs after him. Mr. Hale, Marcus, please wait. Marcus stopped but didn't turn around. Preston circled in front of him, his breath forming clouds in the freezing air. The confident businessman from the flight was gone, replaced by something smaller, more desperate. I want to apologize. Sincerely. I had no idea who you were. If I had known... If you had known... Marcus's voice was quiet. That's the part that troubles me, Mr. Whitmore. You would have treated me differently if you knew I was wealthy, if you knew I had power. But what about the next person? The one who really is just a man in a hoodie trying to take his son somewhere for Christmas? What happens to him? Preston's mouth worked, but no sound came out. The deal is finished, Marcus continued. I don't do business with people whose decency depends on a balance sheet, but I won't leave you stranded on Christmas Eve. Gregory will arrange a room for you at the Limelight. In the morning, you'll find your own way home. Preston's face crumpled. 15 years. I've spent 15 years building toward this deal. My investors, my partners, everything I've worked for, you should have thought about that before you decided that a man's clothes told you everything you needed to know about his worth. Marcus started to turn away, then stopped. He looked back at Preston, and something in his expression shifted. Not softening exactly, but deepening. I grew up poor, Mr. Whitmore. I know what it's like to be invisible, to have people look right through you because you don't fit their picture of success. I built everything I have so that my son would never feel that kind of erasure. He glanced down at Elijah, still sleeping against his chest. But tonight you reminded me that money doesn't protect you. Not really. The only thing that protects you is who you are when no one's watching. He walked away, leaving Preston standing alone in the snow. Inside the aircraft, Gregory had turned his attention to Diane. The head flight attendant had been edging toward the rear exit, hoping to slip away unnoticed. But Gregory's voice stopped her cold. Ms. Mercer, we're not finished. Diane froze, then slowly turned to face him. She had rearranged her features into something approaching professionalism, though her hands were shaking. I was following the captain's instructions, she said quickly. He made the decisions. You refused to serve a passenger water for his child. You blocked him from using the lavatory. You made comments within his hearing about his appearance and his right to be on this aircraft. Gregory's voice was measured but merciless. The captain didn't instruct you to do any of those things. You chose them. He didn't belong in first class. Anyone could see that. He owns the plane, Ms. Mercer. He owns the company. He is, quite literally, your employer's employer. Gregory let that sink in. You are terminated, effective immediately. You are also permanently banned from all Hale Global Aviation properties. That includes every airline and charter service under our umbrella. I'd suggest finding a new industry. Diane's composure finally shattered. You can't do this. I have rights. I'll sue. You threatened and discriminated against a passenger in front of multiple witnesses. I'd think very carefully about what kind of legal attention you want to attract. Diane opened her mouth to argue, then saw the look on Gregory's face and thought better of it. She grabbed her bag and pushed past him toward the exit, her heels clicking furiously on the cabin floor. Gregory then turned to Richard and Meredith Ashford, who had been trying to quietly gather their belongings and slip away unnoticed. "Mr. and Mrs. Ashford." Richard straightened, attempting to summon some of his earlier arrogance. "Now look here, we didn't do anything. We're just passengers. Whatever happened between the crew and that man has nothing to do with us." Gregory pulled out his tablet and scrolled through a document. "According to the incident report, you referred to Mr. Hale as someone's nephew who benefited from affirmative action in the skies. You also stated, and I quote, 'Everyone gets a seat at the table whether they've earned it or not.'" These comments were made loudly enough for Mr. Hale and other passengers to hear. Meredith clutched her husband's arm. "That's just conversation. We didn't know who he was." "Which is precisely the point, Mrs. Ashford. Your behavior wasn't wrong because of who Mr. Hale turned out to be. It was wrong regardless." Gregory's voice carried the weight of finality. "You are both permanently banned from all Hale Global Aviation Services. Every charter company, every airline partnership, every private terminal we operate. Your names will be flagged in our system. You'll need to find alternative means of travel for the foreseeable future." Richard's face went scarlet. "This is outrageous. Do you know who I am? Do you know who my clients are?" "I know exactly who you are, Mr. Ashford, and after tonight so will everyone in my network." Gregory stepped aside and gestured toward the exit. "Your luggage will be delivered to the terminal. I suggest you arrange ground transportation. You won't be flying with us again." Richard sputtered, searching for words, but Meredith pulled him toward the door. As they passed Gregory, she shot him a venomous look that promised future litigation. Gregory watched them go with the calm expression of a man who had excellent lawyers and even better documentation. Marcus had reached the SUVs when he heard footsteps behind him. He turned to find Elena standing a few feet away, her thin uniform coat wrapped tightly around her shoulders. She looked terrified. "Mr. Hale, I just wanted to say—" She stopped, swallowed hard. "I know I didn't do enough. I should have spoken up. I was scared of losing my job, and I know that's not an excuse, but—" "Elena." Marcus's voice was gentle. "Come here." She approached cautiously, like someone expecting to be struck. "You gave us water when everyone else refused. You apologized when no one else would. You showed kindness to a stranger when it would have been easier to look away." He studied her face. "You told me about your mother, that she's sick, that she depends on you." Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. "I have a private flight crew. They handle travel for my family and for the most important people in my life. I need people on that team who have integrity, who do the right thing even when they're afraid." Marcus reached into his pocket and produced a business card. "This is my assistant's direct line. Call her tomorrow. The position pays double what you're making now, with full medical benefits for you and your mother, if you want it." Elena stared at the card like it might disappear. "I don't understand. Why would you do this for me?" "Because you were the only person on that plane who treated my son and me like human beings. That's worth more than you know." Elena's eyes filled with tears. She took the card with trembling fingers. "Thank you. I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything. Just keep being who you are." Marcus turned and opened the SUV door. As he climbed inside, settling Elijah carefully on the seat beside him, his son's eyes fluttered open. "Daddy, are we there?" "We're here, buddy. We made it to Aspen." Elijah looked out the window at the falling snow, then back at his father. "Why was everyone yelling? Were they scared?" Marcus buckled his son's seatbelt and pulled him close. "They were scared, but not of the storm." "What were they scared of?" Marcus considered the question. Through the tinted window, he could see Brock being led toward a security vehicle, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Preston was still standing where Marcus had left him, staring at nothing. Richard and Meredith were arguing with a terminal attendant, their gestures sharp with frustration. And Elena stood apart from all of them, clutching the business card, a smile breaking across her face like dawn. They were scared of finding out that they weren't as good as they thought they were, Marcus said finally. That's a hard thing to learn about yourself. Elijah considered this with the seriousness of a child who didn't fully understand, but knew it mattered. Are we good people, Daddy? Marcus kissed the top of his son's head. We try to be, buddy. Every day we try. The SUV pulled away from the tarmac, its headlights cutting through the swirling snow. In the rearview mirror, the Gulf Stream grew smaller, then disappeared entirely. Somewhere over the mountains, church bells were ringing, welcoming Christmas morning. Marcus held his son close and watched the darkness give way to the lights of Aspen. They had come for new memories, and in a way, they had found them. Not the ones he had planned, but perhaps the ones Elijah needed. Because on this night, his son had learned something important. That kindness is its own kind of power. That how you treat people when you have nothing to gain reveals everything about who you are. And that sometimes the smallest act of decency can change a life. Elena would call tomorrow. She would take the job. She would care for her mother and build a new future, all because she had offered water to a stranger's child. That, Marcus thought, was the real Christmas miracle. Not wealth or power or revenge. Just one person, choosing kindness when it would have been so much easier not to. The snow kept falling as they drove into the mountains, leaving the airport and its broken people behind.
If this story touches or hurts, please follow and share it so more people can find hope there in their own storm. So support help us bring more stories of the time, courage, and kindness to life.